The thing in the cage never barked once during the drive across Nebraska. That was the first detail that kept clawing at me afterward. You expect something that size to bark, or howl, or throw itself against steel bars like an animal in a bad movie. But the creature behind me stayed mostly silent. Silent except for the breathing. Heavy, wet, human in all the wrong places. I heard it through 700 miles of empty highway. Every inhale dragged slow through its chest like it hurt to stay alive. Every exhale sounded almost patient, like it already knew where we were going long before I did. The smell reached the cab before sunset. Wet fur mixed with copper and old mud. I kept the driver window cracked even though February wind cut through my coat sleeves hard enough to sting my skin raw. You need to understand something before I go any further. I hauled dangerous freight for 38 years. Military surplus, industrial chemicals, slaughterhouse refrigeration units packed with hanging cattle. Once I drove 2 armored trucks full of uranium shielding through Wyoming during a snowstorm so bad the state police turned back halfway through it. Nothing ever bothered me before that load. Nothing. But by the second night I started checking the mirrors every 15 seconds without realizing it. Not because the thing moved, because sometimes it stopped breathing altogether. And when the breathing stopped, the whole trailer felt wrong, like there was another person sitting in the dark behind me, watching. The route started outside Flagstaff, middle of nowhere, some private holding facility buried in the trees where the roads narrowed down to packed dirt and old snow. No company logos, no government signs, just chain fences and floodlights. I should have turned around the second I saw the guards carrying rifles instead of sidearms. Looking back now, that was my first real mistake. Not taking the job. I needed the money, needed it bad after Linda died, and the medical bills ate what little retirement I had left. No, the mistake was seeing armed men nervous around something locked in a cage and still convincing myself it was explainable. People like me always need explanations. We build our whole lives around them. A sound has a source. Tracks belong to an animal. Men bleed because they can die. Simple things. The world worked better when it stayed simple. The dispatcher told me it was exotic animal transport. Said some rich collector in Pennsylvania was moving rare wildlife under federal permit. Half the paperwork had blacked out sections. That bothered me too. But not enough. $8,000 cash for 4 days, driving changes how suspicious a lonely old trucker gets. That afternoon, the snowmelt dripped off pine branches in long, steady taps. I remember that clearly because the whole facility was quiet except for water and generators humming behind concrete walls. No birds. That should have mattered more than it did. A younger guard walked me toward the loading bay while 2 others stayed close behind him. Nervous kid, maybe 25. His rifle shook every time something heavy slammed far inside the building. The storm hit near Amarillo just after sunset. Rain hammered the windshield so hard the wipers blurred into useless streaks. Trucks pulled off the interstate one by one, hazard lights flickering like dying signals in the dark. I kept driving anyway. The farther east I went, the worse it got. Lightning tore across the fields. Thunder rolled through the cab. The trailer behind me swayed hard in the wind, but inside it stayed silent. That silence bothered me more than anything. I stopped near the Oklahoma border after midnight at an empty rest stop. 3 trucks sat under dead floodlights. Rain poured off the roof in heavy sheets. When I shut the engine off, the first thing I noticed was the breathing behind me. Wet, heavy, closer than before. I should have slept. Instead, I took the flashlight. That's the problem with isolation. After too many years alone, No one is there to tell you to stop. Only your own curiosity pushing you forward. Rain soaked through my jacket instantly as I walked toward the trailer. Thunder rolled low across the plains. The tarp had nearly blown free, exposing most of the cage. That's when I saw it clearly. 2 creatures inside, one large, one smaller. The larger one stood near the bars, watching me. Thick black fur, amber eyes, massive shoulders rising and falling with slow control. The smaller one lay curled deeper inside the cage, weaker, coughing softly through the rain. Sick. That explained it. The larger one stepped between me and the smaller creature immediately. Protective, not aggressive. Protective. That detail hit harder than anything else so far. Predators don't protect like that. Families do. Rain streamed down its face as it watched me. Around its neck hung a leather cord with a silver cross. Human made, tied carefully, worn, not stolen. That changed everything. The smaller creature coughed again, weaker this time. The larger one turned back to it instantly, making a low rumbling sound that felt almost like comfort. Then it looked at me again, and tapped the cage floor twice. Tap, tap, same rhythm, same message. And this time, I didn't feel like I was watching an animal anymore. Tap, tap. The same signal again. I moved closer before common sense could stop me. Close enough to smell them clearly now. Wet earth, blood, pine sap. The larger creature studied my face with those terrible, intelligent eyes, while lightning flashed behind us over empty Oklahoma fields. "You two been together long?" I heard myself ask. A stupid question. But loneliness makes people talk to impossible things. The larger creature blinked once slowly. Then something moved inside the shadows near the smaller one. A hand. Smaller fingers reached weakly across the cage floor until they touched the older creature's leg. The older one lowered its head immediately. Gentle. God help me, gentle. That image stayed with me harder than all the violence later did. Because monsters are easier when they act like monsters. The younger creature finally lifted its face enough for me to see its eyes. Pale gray instead of amber, feverish, frightened, and human in ways no face should ever be human. I stepped backward instinctively. The older one reacted immediately with a low, warning growl, not loud, just enough. I raised both hands. Easy, I'm not doing anything. The growling stopped almost at once. That should have terrified me more than it did. The control in it. The restraint. I noticed then that food trays sat untouched near the cage corner. Raw meat sealed inside metal containers. The younger creature had not eaten. "You sick?" I asked quietly. The older one kept staring at me. Then, very slowly, it nudged one of the trays toward the younger creature with its foot. No response. The storm intensified overhead. Wind howled through the truck stop hard enough to shake nearby trailers. And suddenly, from somewhere far across the dark plains came a sound. A howl. Not coyote, not wolf. Longer, deeper. The older creature reacted instantly. Every muscle in its body locked tight. Its ears rose sharply toward the darkness. The younger one whimpered softly from the back corner. Then the older creature looked at me again with something I can only describe as fear. Real fear. Another howl answered the first one, farther away. Then another. My blood went cold, because those sounds were communicating, and whatever sat inside my trailer was not alone out there. I backed away from the cage slowly while the older creature paced for the first time since Arizona. The entire trailer rocked under its weight. Rain slashed sideways through the parking lot now, thunder cracking directly overhead. The younger creature made another weak coughing noise from the shadows. Then the older one did something that still wakes me up some nights. It looked directly at me and shook its head once, like a person saying no, like a warning. A truck engine started nearby suddenly, and both creatures vanished backward into darkness so fast I lost sight of them completely. The moment broke. Just like that. I hurried back to the cab soaked to the skin and locked the doors again with shaking hands. My heart hammered hard enough to hurt. The howls came twice more while I sat there gripping the wheel. Distant, moving, circling somewhere beyond the highway lights. I did not sleep at all that night. Around 4 in the morning, exhaustion finally pushed me into a half-dream state behind the wheel. Not real sleep. That strange drifting truckers learn after decades on the road. And during that haze I heard music. Soft at first, then clearer. A harmonica. I jerked awake immediately. The sound stopped. My harmonica still sat on the dashboard beside me, untouched. Rain continued hammering the cab roof while darkness pressed against every window. Then, from the trailer came 2 soft taps. Tap. Tap. I stared at the mirrors. Nothing visible except shadows. Slowly, I reached for the harmonica. I had not played since Linda's funeral. Could not stand hearing the thing any more afterward. But something about that storm, that empty parking lot, those impossible creatures sitting wounded behind steel bars. Something broke loose inside me. I lifted the harmonica slowly and played 3 quiet notes. Old blues, tune Linda used to hum while washing dishes. The breathing behind me stopped completely. Silence. Then, after several long seconds, came a sound from the trailer unlike anything I had heard before. Not growling, not coughing. Humming. Low and rough through damaged lungs. Almost trying to follow the melody. I felt tears hit my face before I even realized I was crying. Because grief recognizes grief. Even inside monsters. Especially inside monsters. That was the moment I stopped seeing cargo behind me and started seeing prisoners. Morning arrived gray and bitter cold across western Oklahoma. Ice crusted the truck windows thick enough I had to scrape it away with an old fuel card, while wind tore across the empty plains hard enough to numb my fingers. I remember looking terrible when I caught my reflection in the side mirror. Bloodshot eyes, white stubble, skin pulled tight from exhaustion. A haunted old man driving east with monsters in a cage. The strange thing is that by then the fear had already started changing shape inside me. Not disappearing. Fear never disappeared around those creatures. But it shifted into something heavier. Responsibility. That was my next mistake. I climbed back into the cab and started the engine while dawn light spread slowly across frozen fields. The trailer groaned behind me as suspension chains tightened. Then came the breathing again. Steady this time. Both of them awake. I drove for almost 3 hours before stopping at another fuel station outside Tulsa. Smaller place than the diner. Just 2 pumps beside a cracked convenience store with faded signs hanging crooked over the windows. The younger creature started coughing harder during that stretch of road. Wet coughing. Painful. Every time it happened, the older one responded with those low chest sounds, comforting noises, protective noises. By then, I had started talking back without realizing it. Holding together back there? I muttered once while checking the mirrors. The older creature tapped twice against the cage floor. Tap. Tap. I actually laughed quietly at that. Not because anything was funny, more because my mind had begun adapting to insanity the way people adapt to bad weather. Human beings normalize impossible things frighteningly fast. That scared me later. At the fuel stop, I bought bottled water, jerky, black coffee, and 2 packs of aspirin. My joints hurt constantly during winter drives after 65. Old army injuries never stay buried forever. The teenage cashier kept glancing nervously toward the trailer outside. "You got wolves in there or something?" he asked. "No," he frowned. "Then what keeps hitting the walls?" I stopped counting how many lies I told during that trip. Outside, the sky hung low and white over endless, flat farmland. Windmills turned slowly in distant fields. I stood beside the pump, sipping burnt coffee while diesel fumes mixed with freezing air. Then I heard it again. The harmonica melody, soft, almost hesitant. 3 broken notes from inside the trailer. My entire body locked still. I walked slowly toward the cage, trying to convince myself highway noise distorted something ordinary. But deep down, I already knew better. The tarp had finally blown almost completely away during the storm, the whole cage visible now beneath steel support beams. The older creature sat near the bars watching me approach, and in its hand was my harmonica. For several seconds, my brain refused to process what I was seeing. The creature held the instrument carefully between clawed fingers, not crushing it, studying it. Then very slowly it lifted the harmonica toward its muzzle and blew another weak, uneven note. I realized then it must have reached through the small ventilation opening behind the cab during the night while I slept. Any sense of safety I still carried vanished instantly. Those hands were dexterous enough to unlatch things, smart enough to imitate. The older creature watched my face carefully while holding the harmonica out toward me through the bars, returning it, not because it feared punishment, because it understood ownership. "You shouldn't have that," I whispered. The creature tilted its head slightly. Then behind it, the younger one coughed violently again. Blood splattered across the cage floor. The older creature immediately turned away from me and crouched beside the smaller one. Its huge hand rested carefully against the younger creature's back while those low rumbling sounds returned. Comfort. Again and again, it came back to comfort. I should have reported the situation right then, called somebody, state police, Federal Wildlife Services, anyone. Instead, I grabbed the harmonica slowly through the bars. Our fingers touched for half a second. Warm. That detail bothered me for years afterward. The warmth. Because dead things are cold, monsters should feel cold, but its skin felt alive. The older creature pulled its hand back immediately afterward. Not aggressive, almost cautious. Then it tapped twice against the steel floor again. Tap, tap. "You keep doing that," I said quietly. "What's it mean?" The creature stared at me. Long enough that I started feeling ridiculous for expecting answers. Then, suddenly, it looked past me toward the highway. Every muscle in its body tightened. I turned instinctively. A black sport utility vehicle had just entered the station parking lot. No license plate. 2 men inside wearing dark jackets. The older creature released a deep growl the instant the vehicle stopped. Pure hatred in that sound. Not fear, recognition. The passenger stepped out first. Tall man, buzz cut, military posture. He walked toward me, carrying a clipboard, while the driver stayed inside watching the trailer. "You, Robert Bowman?" he asked. I nodded slowly. He handed me a fresh envelope. Route adjustment. Inside were new directions, changing the delivery point from Pennsylvania to somewhere in the Appalachian Mountains near West Virginia. No explanation. Just coordinates. I remember asking why. The man smiled without warmth. Need to avoid populated areas. Behind us, the older creature slammed, once against the cage bars so hard the whole trailer shook. The man barely reacted. That terrified me more than anything so far, because people only stay calm around danger they already understand. He glanced toward the cage casually. "How's the cargo behaving?" Cargo. I hated that word suddenly. Smaller one's sick, I said before thinking. The man's expression flattened immediately. How sick? Coughing blood. For the first time he looked genuinely annoyed, not concerned. Annoyed. He pulled out a radio and spoke quietly into it while the driver watched me from the vehicle. Then the man turned back toward me. Do not open that cage under any circumstances. If the younger specimen deteriorates further, continue driving anyway. Specimen. Another word I hated. What exactly are these things? I asked. The man studied me for several seconds before answering. You're being paid to transport, nothing else. Then he walked away. The older creature remained absolutely still until the vehicle disappeared back onto the highway. Only then did the tension leave its body, and for one brief moment I realized something horrifying. The creatures feared those men more than they feared captivity. That changed everything. I drove east again through freezing rain while questions kept multiplying inside my head. The younger creature's coughing worsened steadily throughout the afternoon. Sometimes I heard weak scratching sounds from the cage floor, followed by the older one pacing restlessly. Twice I considered abandoning the trailer entirely. But where would I go? Who would believe this story? An aging trucker claiming he transported intelligent dogmen across state lines for men without license plates. No, by then I was trapped same as the creatures were, just in different ways. Around dusk, I crossed into Missouri. Forest started replacing farmland gradually. Bare, winter trees lining narrow stretches of highway. Hills rising dark against the horizon. The farther east we traveled, the more agitated the older creature became. Its pacing never stopped now, back and forth. Heavy footsteps rattling the trailer floor, and occasionally from far off in those woods came distant howls through the night air. Always after sunset, always answered by silence inside the cage. The older creature never howled back, not once. That detail matters, because even then it was following some kind of rule. Later, I understood why. That night I parked near an abandoned way station because exhaustion had started making the road blur. Fog drifted low across the forest around the highway. Everything smelled like wet leaves and cold earth. I sat in the cab, eating stale crackers while staring at the harmonica in my lap. Then, from the trailer, came 3 soft notes again. Not random this time. The same melody I played during the storm. I closed my eyes hard. You're not supposed to know songs, I whispered. The breathing behind me slowed. Then came a voice, very quiet, very rough, but unmistakably words. Cold. I felt every hair rise on my arms instantly. The voice sounded damaged, like someone learning speech after years without using it. I turned slowly toward the dark rear window behind the cab, nothing visible, only breathing. Then the older creature spoke again. Cold, her, the younger one. Jesus Christ! I sat frozen while my mind tried desperately to reject what I had heard. Animals mimic sounds sometimes. Birds do, certain primates do. But this was different. This carried intention, meaning. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped out into freezing fog once more. My knees actually shook walking toward the trailer. The older creature crouched near the bars waiting for me, and beside it the younger one trembled violently against the steel floor. Its gray fur soaked dark with sweat and blood. The older creature pointed one claw slowly toward the younger creature, then toward me, not threatening, begging. Fog drifted through the abandoned way station in pale ribbons while trucks groaned somewhere far down the interstate. The whole world felt muffled. Quiet in the unnatural way, heavy snow makes things quiet even though there was no snow falling yet. Just cold. The younger creature lay curled against the cage floor, trembling so hard the chains rattled beneath its body. Blood stained the fur around its mouth dark black beneath the flashlight beam, and the older creature kept looking between me and the smaller one with growing desperation. I stood there, frozen, outside the bars, trying to force logic back into my head. This thing had spoken, not mimicked, spoken, cold, her, simple words, broken words, but intentional. My pulse hammered so hard I could hear blood moving in my ears. The older creature slowly extended one arm toward the smaller one again, then toward me, begging, God help me, begging. "You can understand me," I whispered. The older creature blinked once, then it nodded. A tiny movement, almost hesitant, but unmistakable. I staggered backward a step after that, because part of my brain simply refused to stay attached to reality anymore. You spend 67 years believing the world functions one way, and then suddenly something impossible looks you in the eye and asks for help. Not because it wants freedom, because someone it loves is dying. The younger creature coughed again, wet and terrible. The older one immediately crouched beside her. I say her now because eventually I understood the relationship between them. But back then, I only knew the larger one treated the smaller creature with the same careful panic I remembered feeling beside Linda's hospital bed. Not because death surprised you, because helplessness did. I should have called authorities. Instead, I unlocked the trailer's side compartment and grabbed 2 wool blankets from my emergency kit. That decision changed every life connected to this story. The older creature watched silently while I approached the bars again. Its chest rose slowly with controlled breaths. Deliberately controlled, like it understood I scared easily. "You try anything," I muttered nervously, "and we both die out here." The creature kept still. I slid one blanket carefully through the lower feeding slot. The older creature did not grab for it immediately. That mattered too. It waited until my hands cleared the opening before touching the fabric. Gentle. Always gentler than it should have been. It carried the blanket toward the younger creature and wrapped it carefully around her shoulders with movements too practiced to be accidental. Then it took the second blanket and folded it beneath her head. I remember just staring at that scene through the bars while cold fog curled around my boots, because monsters were not supposed to know tenderness. The younger creature looked smaller up close, her gray fur thinner around the throat and wrists where patches of pale skin showed beneath. One ear torn badly near the edge. Fever burned visibly through her eyes. The older creature rested one massive hand against her chest while she coughed, monitoring her breathing. I had seen husbands do that in cancer wards, not beasts. "You got names?" I asked before realizing how insane the question sounded. The older creature looked at me for several long seconds. Then slowly, it touched its own chest once with 2 claws. "Abel." The word came rough and strained through its throat. Barely speech. Then it touched the younger creature carefully. "June." I felt something crack quietly inside me right then. Not fear, distance. Because names humanize things whether we want them to or not. Abel. June. Not specimens anymore, not cargo. I sat down hard on the trailer step because my knees suddenly felt weak. Fog drifted through dead weeds around the abandoned station, while distant highway lights moved silently through the trees. "You understand all this?" I asked quietly. Abel tilted his head slightly. "Most." The voice sounded painful, as if every word scraped through damaged lungs and vocal cords not built for human speech. "How?" He looked away after that question. Toward the forest. Toward something older than both of us. That silence told me enough. The younger creature stirred weakly beneath the blankets. Her breathing rattled wetly inside her chest. Abel lowered his head beside hers and released those low rumbling comfort sounds again. Then June whispered something too faint for me to catch. Abel answered immediately in another language. Not barking, not growling, words. Deep rhythmic sounds layered with throat clicks and strange tonal shifts. Ancient sounding somehow, like hearing language before language finished becoming human. I wish I could explain it better. The conversation lasted only seconds before June started coughing violently again. Blood splattered across the steel floor. My instincts finally overpowered fear then. "Move," I said sharply. Abel looked at me immediately. I said move. For one dangerous second, neither of us moved at all. Then, slowly, Abel backed away from June. Trust. That was the moment trust entered the picture. I climbed partially through the feeding hatch into the cage area despite every survival instinct screaming at me not to. The smell inside hit hard immediately. Blood, wet fur, infection. June recoiled weakly when I touched her forehead through the blanket. Burning hot. Pneumonia, maybe, or worse. "You got antibiotics in there?" I muttered mostly to myself while digging through the emergency med kit from my cab. Abel watched every movement intensely. I found old veterinary amoxicillin capsules left over from a ranch transport years earlier. Probably expired, probably useless. But it was something. June refused water at first, too weak even to lift her head properly. Abel eventually took the bottle gently from my hands and held it while she drank in small, painful gulps. Watching that nearly broke me. Not because it was frightening, because it looked familiar. Linda had needed help drinking near the end, too. Funny what grief attaches itself to. At some point during all this, I started talking normally to Abel without realizing it. Like another exhausted old man sitting beside me at a truck stop instead of a 7-foot nightmare covered in claws and teeth. "How long they had you?" I asked quietly while crushing antibiotics into water. Abel remained silent for a while. Then finally he answered. "Years? How many?" Another silence. "Many." The way he said it still haunts me. Flat. Empty. Like time stopped mattering after a certain point. I looked closer than at the scars beneath his fur, burn marks around the wrists, old bullet wounds along the shoulder. Something inside me turned cold. "Those men hunting you?" Abel's amber eyes lifted toward mine. "Not hunt." He paused painfully, searching for words. "Keep." The forest beyond the way station suddenly erupted with distant howls, multiple voices, closer than before. June whimpered softly beneath the blankets. Abel immediately turned toward the darkness beyond the highway. Every muscle in his body tightened. I heard movement in the trees then. Large movement. Branches snapping far beyond the fog. Abel looked back at me sharply. "Go." The word came stronger this time. Urgent. I stood slowly from the cage floor. "What's out there?" Abel's nostrils flared toward the woods. Family. The howls came again, closer now, and underneath them I heard something worse. Answering growls from somewhere much nearer than the forest edge. Not outside. Inside the truck stop. My blood turned to ice. I backed out of the cage immediately while Abel moved protectively over June again. Fog rolled thick across the cracked parking lot, now swallowing visibility beyond 30 feet. Then I saw movement. A shape crossing between the abandoned fuel pumps. Tall. Too tall. Another shape followed behind it, silently. Not human. The creatures moved along the edge of the fog in quick, unnatural bursts. Gray fur, long arms, reflective eyes catching stray highway light. There were at least 3 of them. Maybe more. They surrounded the way station without making a sound. I grabbed the revolver from my cab glove compartment with shaking hands. Old Smith & Wesson, Vietnam carryover, mostly sentimental by then. Abel saw the gun and growled low immediately, not threatening me, warning me not shoot. One of the figures emerged closer through the fog then, larger than the others. Scarred muzzle, yellow eyes fixed directly on the trailer. The thing sniffed the air once, then looked straight at me. No fear, no hesitation, recognition, like it already knew exactly what I was. The harmonica slipped from my jacket pocket accidentally and hit the pavement near my boots. That tiny metallic sound changed everything. Every creature around the way station instantly focused on it. The scarred one tilted its head slightly. Then, from inside the cage, Abel released a deep, violent growl, unlike anything I had heard from him before. Possessive, protective, about the harmonica. That was when I finally understood the tapping. Twice. Always twice. Same rhythm as the 3 opening notes from the song. Not random communication. Memory. He remembered the music. And somehow that frightened the others more than the gun did. The fog thickened until the world outside my headlights barely existed anymore. Pale white vapor rolled low across cracked pavement and dead weeds while shapes moved silently inside it. Watching. Waiting. The scarred creature near the fuel pumps never took its eyes off the harmonica lying beside my boot. Neither did Abel. That was the strangest part. Not because they wanted the thing, because they reacted to it like it carried meaning deeper than sound. I bent slowly and picked it up. Every creature surrounding the way station tensed immediately. Not because I held a weapon, because I held memory. I know how insane that sounds. Believe me. I spent years afterward trying to explain those moments with logic. Group conditioning, maybe. Some experimental response training. But deep down, I knew what I had seen in their faces. Recognition. The scarred creature stepped closer through the fog. Taller than Abel by at least half a foot. Gray fur torn by old wounds. One cloudy eye half blinded by scar tissue. And around its neck hung the exact same braided leather cord I had seen on Abel's wrist. Family. Real family. Abel stood upright inside the cage then. The trailer's suspension groaned beneath his weight while he positioned himself protectively in front of June. His growling deepened. The creature outside answered immediately. Not a challenge. An argument. The sounds passed between them, low and rapid. Complex. Emotional. I remember standing there in freezing fog, with a revolver in one hand and a harmonica in the other, while 2 impossible creatures fought over something I could not understand. Then June cried out weakly from inside the cage. Everything changed instantly after that. The scarred creature outside froze mid-growl. Every other shape moving in the fog stopped too, listening. June coughed again, hard enough blood splattered against the cage bars. The scarred creature moved closer immediately. Not toward me, toward her. Abel slammed both hands against the steel floor with explosive force. The entire trailer shook violently. His teeth bared fully for the first time since Arizona. The message was clear. Stay back. The scarred creature answered with a roar, so deep it rattled through my chest like thunder. I finally understood then what terrified Abel so badly. They were not trying to rescue June. They were trying to reclaim her. And Abel did not trust them. The fog suddenly exploded with movement all around us. More shapes emerging silently between abandoned trucks and dead fuel pumps. Yellow eyes reflecting through the dark. 5. Maybe 6 altogether. One crawled along the roof of the way station building low and spider-like. Another circled wide behind my trailer, sniffing the air. I raised the revolver instinctively, though my hands shook hard. Abel saw it immediately. No. The word hit like a bark through the fog. Every creature froze again, including me. Abel pointed sharply toward the cab. Go. The command sounded almost human now. Then the scarred creature outside looked directly at me and spoke too. Not clearly, not smoothly, but enough. Give. Its voice sounded deeper than Abel's. Older, more damaged. It pointed one claw toward June. My stomach turned cold. She stays, Abel growled. The scarred creature snarled violently after hearing that. Several others moved closer through the fog in response. Pack behavior, pressure building. I should have driven away immediately. Any sane man would have climbed into the cab and left all of them behind. But June started coughing again. And Abel looked terrified, not for himself, for her. That mattered. I raised both hands slowly, trying to calm things down despite the absurdity of trying to negotiate with monsters. She's sick, I said carefully. Everybody calm down. The scarred creature stared at me with its one good eye. Then it sniffed the air again. Its expression changed slightly afterward. Not softer exactly, curious. Dead female, it rumbled. The words punched straight through my chest. Linda. It smelled Linda on my clothes. Grief has a scent, apparently. I remember feeling suddenly exposed, standing there in that fog, like the creature had reached directly into my life with those 3 broken words. Abel lowered his growling slightly. The others stayed tense around the parking lot edges. Then, unexpectedly, June whispered something weakly from inside the cage. The scarred creature reacted immediately. Pain crossed its face so clearly I recognized it despite everything else monstrous about it. Family again. Always family underneath the horror. The creatures began speaking rapidly after that in their strange throat language. Abel answering angrily from inside the cage while the scarred one paced outside near the trailer wheels. I could not understand a single word, but emotion translates easier than language sometimes. Fear, urgency, disagreement, and beneath all of it, grief. The fog carried another sound then. Engines, distant at first. Abel heard them before I did. His head snapped sharply toward the highway. The scarred creature froze too. Then every creature around the way station vanished into the fog almost instantly. Silent. Fast. Only the scarred one lingered near the pumps, watching the road. Headlights appeared seconds later through the mist. 2 black sport utility vehicles. No license plates. My stomach dropped immediately. The men from Oklahoma. The vehicles rolled slowly into the way station while Abel backed deep into the cage shadows with June pressed beneath him protectively. The scarred creature outside disappeared just before the headlights reached the trailer. Gone so fast it barely seemed real. The first vehicle stopped hard beside my cab. 4 armed men stepped out wearing heavy winter jackets and carrying rifles fitted with suppressors. Not hunters. Professionals. The buzz-cut man from Oklahoma approached immediately. "Why did you stop?" he demanded. I tried keeping my voice steady. "Weather." He scanned the fog around us suspiciously. Then his eyes landed on the exposed cage. Abel remained perfectly still inside. Too still. One of the armed men walked toward the trailer carrying a flashlight. He shined it through the bars directly onto June. "Specimen 2's declining," he said flatly. "Specimen 2. God, I hated those words by then." The buzz-cut man cursed quietly under his breath. "We're behind schedule already." Another howl echoed faintly from the forest beyond the highway. Every armed man reacted instantly. Rifles raised. The buzz-cut man turned toward me sharply. "Did you hear anything out here?" I should have lied better. Probably would have saved lives. Instead, I hesitated too long. His expression changed immediately. "What did you see?" "Nothing," I answered. Wrong answer. Professionals know hesitation. The man stepped closer until I could smell coffee and cigarette smoke on his jacket. Mr. Bowman. This route was chosen because the surrounding territory is unpopulated. So, if something moved through these woods tonight, I need details immediately. Another howl sounded closer this time. One of the armed men near the trailer stiffened visibly. Then, from somewhere beyond the fog came an answering growl. Very close. The buzz cut man swore. Load the darts. Panic spread through the group instantly after that. Not loud panic, trained panic, fast movements. Rifles checked. Ammunition swapped. Fear hidden beneath procedure. I backed toward my cab slowly while watching them. "Who are these things?" I asked again. Nobody answered. The younger armed guard finally muttered something under his breath while loading tranquilizer rounds. There used to be dozens. The older guard beside him snapped immediately. "Shut up. Too late." The words landed hard. Used to be dozens. The buzz. Cutman pointed toward the cab. "You leave in 5 minutes, straight through to the destination. No more unscheduled stops." Then he lowered his voice slightly. "And if anything tries to approach the trailer again, you keep driving no matter what you hear." Again. Not if. Again. That confirmed everything. The howls returned all around us then. Not distant anymore, close, moving. The fog beyond the fuel pumps shifted with large shapes circling just outside visibility. One of the armed men suddenly shouted, "Movement, left side." Everything exploded after that. Gunfire cracked through the fog. Suppressed, but still violent enough to make my ears ring. Creatures roared from the darkness. One massive shape slammed into a guard hard enough to throw him across the pavement like a rag doll. Chaos swallowed the way station instantly. And through all of it, Abel never tried escaping the cage. Not once. He only covered June with his own body while bullets and screaming filled the fog around us. That was when I finally understood something terrible. The cage was not keeping Abel inside. It was keeping everyone else away from June. The first guard died beside the fuel pumps. I did not fully understand what I was seeing at first because the attack happened too fast for my eyes to track properly. 1 second the man stood aiming into the fog. The next, something huge exploded from the darkness and hit him hard enough to fold his body backward over the hood of the sport utility vehicle. The scream only lasted half a second. Then, blood sprayed across the headlights. Every rifle opened fire immediately afterward. Suppressed shots cracked sharply through the mist, while creatures moved between the fog in terrifying bursts of speed. Not charging straight, circling, coordinated. Military instincts returned before conscious thought did. I dropped beside my truck tire and crawled toward the cab while bullets punched through metal around me. One creature launched onto the roof of the second vehicle with enough force to cave it inward. Another dragged a screaming guard directly into the fog beyond the way station. The screaming stopped almost instantly. The buzz, Cutman shouted orders I could barely hear over gunfire. Protect the cargo. Cargo. Even during slaughter, that was still the priority. I reached the cab door and pulled myself inside, shaking so badly I nearly dropped the revolver. My heart hammered against my ribs while fog swirled white through shattered headlights outside. Then I looked in the rearview mirror. Abel was staring directly at me through the cage bars. Still covering June with his body. Still not escaping. Another creature slammed against the trailer from outside hard enough to rock the entire rig. Metal shrieked. Chains rattled violently. June cried out weakly beneath Abel, and something inside me finally snapped. Not courage, not heroism, just exhaustion. Exhaustion with death. With cages. With watching frightened things suffer while men with guns called them specimens. I grabbed the trailer release keys from the dashboard compartment before my brain could stop me. Looking back now, that was the true breaking point of the entire story. The moment there was no path back to ordinary life anymore. Outside, the firefight spread across the way station in flashes of muzzle light and movement. Fog turned red in places from blood spraying through headlights. One of the creatures crouched atop the fuel station roof, screaming something that almost sounded human between snarls. The sound froze me colder than the violence did, because underneath the rage there was grief. The buzz-cut man saw me climbing from the cab with the keys and immediately pointed his rifle toward me. "Get back inside." I kept moving toward the trailer. "Mr. Bowman, stop walking." Another gunshot echoed through the fog, followed by terrible, wet, crunching sounds somewhere near the pumps. I remember yelling back at him then. First real anger I had shown the entire trip. "What are they?" He stared at me without answering. "What are they?" The older guard with the burned neck shouted from behind an overturned vehicle. "Sir, east perimeter breached." The buzz-cut man ignored him. Then finally he looked directly at me and said the words I have spent 12 years wishing I never heard. They were people once. Silence hit me harder than gunfire. Even the chaos around us seemed distant for half a second. The man continued speaking while keeping his rifle trained on me. Experimental infection vectors, genetic instability, military applications. Pick your favorite classified disaster. Another creature roared somewhere beyond the fog. He did not even flinch. We tried containing them for decades. Some adapted better than others. My stomach turned violently. I looked toward the cage, toward Abel shielding June beneath blankets while bullets tore apart the night around them. People once. Dear God, the buzz-cut man stepped closer carefully. "You open that cage and everyone here dies." Behind him another guard screamed as something ripped him screaming into the darkness. The man did not even look back. That told me everything about the kind of operation this really was. Disposable people guarding disposable monsters. I asked the question anyway because part of me still needed hope. Can they think? The buzz-cut man hesitated. That hesitation answered more than words. Then softly he said, "Some of them remember." A terrible crash erupted from the far side of the way station. One of the sport utility vehicles flipped partially sideways as multiple creatures slammed into it together. The fog moved everywhere now. Eyes, teeth, shapes, and over all of it came June's coughing from inside the cage. Weakening. Dying. Abel looked at me again through the bars, not pleading this time, accepting, like he already understood what would happen next. That broke me more than fear ever could. I moved toward the cage locks. The buzz-cut man raised his rifle fully. "Do not do this. You said they were people. They're predators. So are we." His expression hardened after that. For one terrible second I thought he would shoot me. Then the scarred creature exploded from the fog behind him. The impact threw both men across the pavement. Rifle fire erupted wildly. The creature tore into the buzz-cut man with horrifying speed while other guards screamed nearby. I ran for the cage. My hands shook so badly I dropped the keys twice, trying to unlock the restraints. Abel stayed completely still while I worked. No lunging, no aggression, trust again. The first lock snapped open, then the second. The scarred creature roared somewhere behind me, while gunfire flashed through fog and blood. "Robert." I froze. Abel had never said my name before. His voice sounded clearer now somehow, stronger. I looked up slowly. He pointed toward June. "Help her. Not free me. Help her." That detail matters more than anything else in this story. I opened the final cage lock. The steel door swung outward slowly with a long metallic groan. And Abel did not move. Not immediately, He stayed beside June, protecting her, while chaos swallowed the way station outside. I crouched beside them instinctively. June's breathing had become dangerously shallow. Her skin burned beneath the fur. "She needs a hospital," I muttered uselessly. Abel shook his head slowly. "No hospital." The scarred creature suddenly appeared through the fog outside the open cage door. Blood covered its muzzle and shoulders. One eye swollen nearly shut. It saw the cage standing open. Then it saw Abel still inside beside June. The two creatures stared at each other silently while gunfire echoed farther away near the highway. Family divided by something older than violence. The scarred creature stepped closer. Abel growled immediately, not loud, final. The scarred one answered with deep rumbling sounds in their language. Fast, emotional. Abel shook his head. June stirred weakly between them, her pale eyes barely open now. Then very softly she whispered one word. "Home." Everything stopped after that. Even the scarred creature froze. Home, not hunger, not violence. Home. Abel lowered his head beside hers for several long seconds. Then he looked toward me. "Drive." I stared at him confused. "What?" "Mountains." He pointed east. "Home." Another burst of gunfire erupted nearby, followed by screaming. The remaining guards were losing badly. The scarred creature stepped closer to the cage again. Abel turned violently toward it and roared with enough force the trailer walls shook. Every creature moving through the fog stopped instantly after hearing it. Dominance. Authority. The scarred creature backed away slowly. Not defeated. Obeying. I remember realizing then Abel was not simply protecting June from humans. He was protecting her from the others too. Maybe because she was weak, maybe because packs abandon weakness. I still do not know. But Abel trusted neither side anymore. Not humans. Not his own kind, just me. That realization terrified me worse than all the bloodshed around us. Because lonely people will destroy themselves for the first thing that trusts them again. Abel carefully lifted June into his arms. She looked heartbreakingly small against his massive chest beneath the blankets. Then he climbed slowly from the cage. The first free step he took into cold night air stopped every sound inside the way station. No gunfire, no growling, just silence. 7 feet of scarred muscle and wet black fur carrying a dying creature through fog, while blood covered the parking lot around us. Abel looked almost holy in that moment. Not because he was beautiful, because grief stripped away everything monstrous for one impossible second. Then headlights appeared suddenly on the highway above us. More vehicles coming, many more. Abel heard them instantly. So did the others. The scarred creature released a warning howl toward the forest. Shapes immediately began disappearing back into the fog around the way station. Retreating. Abel looked at me one final time beside the open trailer. Then he held out my harmonica. He had carried it through the entire firefight somehow without losing it. I took it slowly. Our fingers touched again. Warm. Human. "Drive," Abel repeated quietly. Then he turned toward the woods, carrying June into the fog, while the surviving creatures followed silently behind them. And for one terrible selfish moment I almost followed too. Because after enough loneliness, even monsters can start feeling like family. I should have driven away. Every sane instinct left inside me screamed to climb into the cab, abandon the entire nightmare, and disappear west before more vehicles arrived. The road was still open. The fog still covered everything. I could have vanished into another state before sunrise. Instead, I stood there holding a bent silver harmonica while blood cooled across broken pavement around me. The way station looked like a battlefield by then. One overturned sport utility vehicle smoked beside the pumps. Another sat riddled with claw marks deep enough to peel metal backward like torn paper. Bodies lay in the fog, some still moving, some not. And somewhere out in the dark woods, Abel carried June farther east toward mountains neither of them might survive reaching. I remember hearing Linda's voice in my head then. Not supernatural nonsense, just memory. The way grief sometimes speaks using people you lost. Robert, don't look away from suffering just because it frightens you. That had been her whole life. Hospice nurse for 23 years. She sat beside dying strangers because most people could not bear to watch pain up close. Funny thing is, I used to think she was the brave one. But bravery and loneliness start looking similar after enough years. The surviving guards regrouped near the highway entrance while new headlights approached through the fog. More black vehicles. Bigger ones this time. Armed men climbing out before the engines fully stopped. Professional cleanup crews. One of them saw me standing near the open cage and immediately raised his rifle. Hands visible. I did not move. Another man approached the destroyed trailer slowly while surveying the blood and bodies around us. Older than the others, gray hair cut military short, calm eyes, too calm. He looked inside the empty cage once, then at me, then toward the forest. Where did they go? I said nothing. He nodded slightly like silence already confirmed everything. The surviving buzz-cut man sat against a vehicle nearby, clutching his shredded shoulder while medics worked around him. He looked pale beneath the blood loss. Angry too. He opened it, he hissed immediately after seeing me. The older commander studied me quietly. Then he glanced down at the harmonica in my hand. Something changed in his face after that. Recognition, maybe? "You played for them," he said softly. Not a question. I felt cold move through my chest again. "How long have you people been doing this?" The commander ignored the question completely. Instead, he walked toward the cage and touched one of the broken restraints thoughtfully. "Did Abel attack anyone?" The way he used the name hit me harder than expected. Not specimen, not subject. "Abel," I answered slowly. "No." The commander nodded once. "That sounds like him." Like him. Not it. That mattered too. The surviving guards loaded bodies into vehicles while dawn slowly approached through the fog. Nobody spoke much. The silence around those men felt heavier than grief. More like routine, like this was not the first disaster cleanup. The commander finally motioned toward my cab. "Mr. Bowman, sit down before you fall down." I realized only then how exhausted my body had become. My knees shook constantly. My hands would not stop trembling. I climbed into the cab while the commander followed carrying 2 paper coffee cups from somewhere. Steam curled through the cold air between us. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Then he said quietly, "Abel was one of the earliest cases." I stared ahead through the windshield. Cases. Volunteers originally. I looked at him sharply after that. The commander rubbed tiredly at his eyes before continuing. Late 1970s. Black operations. Enhanced endurance projects during the Cold War. Soldiers were exposed to unstable biological vectors derived from recovered tissue samples. Recovered from where? Silence. That silence frightened me more than any answer could have. The commander sipped coffee slowly. Most subjects died quickly. Some changed. Fewer stayed intelligent afterward. Abel. People once. Jesus Christ. You're telling me the government made those things? The commander stared out toward the forest. No. We only accelerated something already waiting. I wish I could explain the feeling those words caused. Not fear exactly, something deeper. The sudden realization that humanity had stumbled onto an old wound in the dark and decided to weaponize it. The commander continued quietly. Abel retained memory longer than the others. Language, too. Emotional attachment. Protective instincts. He paused. That made him difficult to control. Control. Always that word underneath everything. And June? A strange expression crossed the commander's face then. Sadness, maybe. She was born afterward. My stomach dropped. Born, not transformed. Born. I looked toward the fog-covered woods immediately. The commander noticed. Yes, he said softly. There are more. Neither of us spoke for a long time after that. The sun finally began rising, pale and weak through the winter clouds. Fog drifted slowly off the highway while crews cleaned blood from pavement with industrial hoses. The commander watched them silently. Then he asked, "Did Abel speak much?" I should have lied. Instead, I answered truthfully. He asked me to help her. The commander closed his eyes briefly after hearing that. Not because he doubted me, because he believed me completely. That was always the problem with Abel, he murmured. Too much humanity left. I gripped the harmonica tighter without realizing it. Why transport them? The commander exhaled slowly. Relocation facility in Appalachia. Remote containment. Better climate for survival. Containment. Yes. I looked at the blood outside. At the shredded vehicles. At what point do you realize cages stopped working? The commander did not answer immediately. Then, very quietly, he said something that has haunted me ever since. Cages were never meant to keep them in. I turned toward him sharply. He looked exhausted, suddenly older. We were protecting them from us. The realization hit hard enough I actually felt dizzy. Not because I trusted the man, God no, but because somewhere deep down I already knew he was telling the truth. Abel had opportunities to kill me repeatedly. Never did. The armed men called him cargo, specimen, asset. But Abel protected June through gunfire instead of escaping. The commander reached into his coat pocket and removed a photograph folded down the center from years of wear. He handed it to me, silently. The image showed a younger Abel standing beside 3 soldiers in jungle fatigues sometime around 1982. Human eyes, human posture, beard instead of fur. And around his neck hung the same silver cross. Dear God, he really had been a man once. What was his real name? I asked quietly. The commander stared at the photo for several seconds. Corporal David Mercer, not Abel. David. That nearly broke me right there in the cab, because names make tragedy personal. The commander took the photograph back carefully. He volunteered after losing his wife and daughter. Thought the program might give his life meaning again. Loneliness. Always loneliness underneath these stories. The commander folded the photograph slowly. Most subjects became violent after transformation. But Mercer, he shook his head faintly. Mercer kept rescuing people during containment breaches instead of attacking them. I thought about Abel wrapping blankets around June, holding water bottles carefully, returning my harmonica, human things, human all along. Another memory surfaced suddenly then. The little girl at the diner. There's a man in there, not a monster, a man. The commander eventually stood from the cab. We'll say the transport was destroyed during an animal attack. You never saw anything unusual. I laughed bitterly at that. Bit late for unusual. For the first time, the commander almost smiled. Then his expression darkened again. If Mercer headed east, recovery teams will hunt him. Same for the others. He paused near the door. If you hear howling near your home in the future, ignore it. Ignore it, like human beings ever ignore grief once it finds them. Before leaving the cab, the commander glanced once more at the harmonica in my hand. He remembered music longer than language, he said quietly. We never understood why, but I understood. Because memory hides inside music differently than words. Songs survive when names disappear. Linda forgot whole conversations during chemotherapy near the end, but she still remembered melodies. The commander stepped down from the cab and disappeared into the growing daylight. I sat there alone for a long time afterward while cleanup crews erased evidence outside. Then, eventually, I started the engine, and instead of driving west toward home, I turned east toward the mountains, toward Abel, toward whatever terrible unfinished thing waited in those forests. The highway into the Appalachian foothills narrowed the farther I drove, until it stopped feeling like an interstate and started feeling like something older than maps. Trees closed in on both sides in thick winter silence, their branches black against a sky that had not fully decided whether it was night or morning. I did not report where I was going. I did not call anyone. I just kept driving east with a harmonica sitting on the passenger seat like it had become some kind of anchor to a life I no longer recognized. Every mile deeper into those mountains felt heavier than the last. Not because of weather or terrain, but because I kept expecting to see movement between the trees. A flash of amber light in the forest edge, a shape standing still long enough to make me question whether I had imagined it. The radio stopped working somewhere in Western Virginia. Static only, then silence. I did not fix it. I left it that way because silence felt closer to truth by then. I reached the coordinates the commander had given me just after dusk. There was no facility waiting there, only an old logging road cut into the hillside, half swallowed by overgrowth and winter mud. Tire tracks led inward, deep and recent. Too recent. I parked at the edge of the road and sat there for a long time with the engine idling. My hands would not stop shaking. The forest beyond the windshield looked wrong in a way I cannot explain even now. Not dangerous in the obvious sense, not threatening like the storm or the gunfire or the cages. It felt aware, like it was holding its breath. Eventually, I stepped out. Cold air hit my face hard enough to sting. Snow had started falling again in slow, quiet flakes that melted as soon as they touched the hood of the truck. I took the harmonica with me without thinking. That detail still bothers me. The forest swallowed sound immediately, no traffic, no wind. Even the distant birds I had grown used to on highways were absent here, only footsteps on wet earth. I followed the tire tracks for nearly 40 minutes before I heard it. Not a howl, not a growl, breathing. Somewhere ahead in the trees, steady and familiar. I slowed down instinctively. Then I heard something else layered beneath it. A low, rhythmic tapping against wood or stone. Tap, tap. I stopped completely. The sound came again, slightly closer this time. Tap, tap. My chest tightened as memory caught up with recognition. The same pattern, the same signal I had seen since Arizona, since the first night. I stepped forward again slowly, pushing branches aside as quietly as I could. The forest opened into a small clearing. There was an old abandoned ranger shelter there, half collapsed under snow and rot. One wall still standing. A broken roof sagging inward like it had given up trying to resist time. And in front of it stood Abel. Not crouched, not hiding, standing. He was thinner than before, fur matted with dried mud and forest debris. One shoulder looked injured, held slightly lower than the other. Blood darkened the snow beneath him in scattered patches, but he was standing upright. Beside him sat June, alive, barely, wrapped in layers of torn fabric and animal hide. Her breathing was shallow but present. Her head rested against Abel's leg while he kept one hand gently on her back. When he saw me, he did not move immediately. Neither did I. For several long seconds, the only thing between us was snowfall and distance. Then I lifted the harmonica slowly so he could see it. His eyes locked onto it immediately. Something changed in his expression at that moment. Not relief exactly, not surprise. Recognition deeper than that. He remembered. I stepped forward into the clearing carefully. Snow crunching under my boots felt too loud in the silence. "You made it," I said quietly. Abel did not respond right away. Then he finally spoke. One word: home. His voice was worse than before. Damaged further, but still there. June stirred slightly at the sound of it. Her eyes opened a fraction, pale and exhausted. I crouched a few feet away from them, unsure how close I was allowed to be anymore. "You need medical help," I said. Abel shook his head slowly. Too late. Those words landed heavier than anything else in this entire journey. I looked at June more closely then. The fever had faded, but something else had taken its place. A deep exhaustion that no medicine could fix. The kind that does not come from injury alone. It comes from being changed. "Why here?" I asked. Abel turned his head slightly toward the broken ranger shelter. "Safe," he said. Then after a pause, "Old place." I realized then this was not random, not escape, not wandering. It was chosen, a memory place. Somewhere away from hunters, away from men with rifles, away from whatever system had been chasing them for decades. I sat down slowly in the snow a few feet away from them. The harmonica felt heavier in my hand now. "I was told you were dangerous," I said quietly. Abel looked at me for a long time. Then he gave a small tired sound that might have been a laugh. "Sometimes." June coughed weakly again, but it was different now, less violent, more distant. Abel immediately adjusted her position carefully, shielding her from the cold wind moving through the trees. That movement alone told me everything I needed to know about him. Whatever he had been made into, whatever had been done to him, something inside had never fully broken. I hesitated before speaking again. "They are still coming," I said. Abel already knew. His ears shifted slightly toward the forest behind me. I heard it then, too. Movement. Far away at first, then closer. Multiple directions. Not random, tracking. Abel stood fully again despite his injury. His body tensed instantly. June lifted her head slightly but could not focus properly. I looked around the forest edges and saw nothing at first. Then amber eyes appeared between the trees, not one set. Several. Abel let out a low sound I had never heard from him before. Not warning, not aggression, final acceptance. He turned toward me slowly. "Go," he said. I shook my head immediately. "No." He stepped closer to me then, close enough that I could see the damage in his face. Old scars, new wounds, exhaustion carved into every movement. "Go," he repeated. June made a small sound behind him. Weak, almost a whisper. "Stay." Abel froze completely. That single word seemed to hold him in place more than chains ever could have. I realized then the worst part of everything. He was not choosing survival anymore. He was choosing her. The shapes in the forest moved closer. Branches cracked under weight. Low growls echoed through the trees like a tightening circle. I stood up slowly. "I can take her," I said suddenly. "I can get her out." Abel stared at me. Long silence. Then he looked at June, then back at me. Something passed through his expression that I cannot fully describe even now. Trust mixed with fear, mixed with something almost like gratitude. He lowered his head slightly. Once. A decision. Then he carefully lifted June and placed her into my arms. She was lighter than I expected. Too light. Her breathing was shallow against my jacket as I held her. Abel stepped back immediately after that. creating space, not for escape, for separation. The forest around us tightened. Closer now, much closer. I backed away, slowly holding June while Abel remained standing in the center of the clearing, alone. I remember whispering, "Come with us." He did not move. Instead, he reached out slowly toward the harmonica still in my hand. I gave it to him. His fingers closed around it gently. Then he did something I did not expect. He pressed it once against June's forehead, like a blessing. Then he turned toward the forest. The amber eyes emerged fully now. At least 6 sets, maybe more. Abel did not run. He simply exhaled once and stepped forward to meet them. I turned and ran, not because I wanted to, because June was still breathing in my arms, and for the first time in this entire story, survival meant leaving him behind. Behind me, the forest erupted into sound, not just violence, something larger, something final. But I did not look back. I did not stop running until the trees began to thin and the ground beneath my boots turned from soft forest mud into gravel road again. June's weight in my arms grew heavier with every step, not because she changed, but because exhaustion was finally catching up with me after everything I had survived. Snow kept falling through the branches in slow, silent sheets. It clung to my sleeves and melted against June's fever-warm skin. Her breathing stayed shallow but steady, like a fragile rhythm refusing to break completely. Behind me, the forest did not sound like a fight anymore. It sounded like something closing, not violence, not chaos, closure. I did not understand that then. I only understood distance, putting space between her and whatever had gathered around Abel in that clearing. When I reached my truck, I laid June gently across the passenger seat and stood there for several seconds, just staring at the steering wheel. My hands would not stop shaking. My body felt like it belonged to someone else now. The harmonica was gone. I had given it to him. That realization landed slowly, like something sinking into deep water. I started the engine and drove without turning on the radio. The headlights cut through the trees on the way back down the mountain, but I kept expecting to see movement in the beam. I kept expecting amber eyes to appear between trunks. They did not. The road out felt longer than the road in. Not physically, emotionally. Every mile carried weight I could not put down anymore. June shifted slightly beside me once during the drive. A weak sound escaped her throat, almost like she was trying to speak but could not find the strength. I leaned closer without taking my eyes off the road. "It's okay," I said quietly. "You're safe now." But even as I said it, I did not believe it completely, because nothing about this entire journey had ever been safe. By the time I reached the nearest small town, dawn had already started to break again. Pale light washed over empty streets and closed storefronts. The world looked normal from the outside. That normality felt almost offensive after what I had seen. I pulled into a small roadside clinic just as the doors were opening. The nurse looked at me like I had walked out of a storm, which, in a way, I had. She asked questions. I answered only what I could without breaking the world apart in the process. A sick woman, dehydration, fever, exposure, nothing else. Never anything else. They took June inside immediately. I watched through the glass as they placed her on a stretcher and rolled her into a back room. Machines were attached. Fluids started flowing into her arm. For the first time in days, I sat down without feeling like something was chasing me. That feeling lasted less than a minute. Because when I closed my eyes, I still saw Abel standing in that clearing. Alone, not afraid, waiting. The clinic called me back later that morning. They said her condition was unstable, but improving slightly with treatment. They asked me who she was. I told them I did not know. That was the first honest lie I told since Arizona. I stayed in the waiting room for hours. Snow outside turned to slush. People came and went. Life continued around me like I was sitting outside of it. Eventually, a police officer arrived. 2 of them. They asked about the mountain road, about gunfire reports, about a missing group of federal contractors. Their questions were careful but persistent. I told them there was a hunting accident in the forest, that I heard shots and left immediately. They wrote it down without believing it. When they left, one of them paused at the door and looked back at me. "You look like you saw something out there," he said. I did not answer, because there was no answer that would make sense anymore. Hours later, the doctor came out and said June had stabilized, not recovered, stabilized. They let me see her for a few minutes. She looked smaller in the hospital bed than she had in the forest. Clean sheets replaced blankets of torn fabric. Machines replaced instinct. Her breathing was quieter now, steadier. When I stepped closer, her eyes opened slightly. For a moment, I thought she might speak again. Instead, she simply looked at me. And something in that look made my chest tighten in a way I still cannot explain. Not recognition, understanding. Like she knew I had been there at the end. I whispered, "You're going to be okay." She did not respond, but her fingers moved slightly against the blanket, a small motion, like remembering. I left the clinic before sunset, not because I wanted to, because I knew staying would not change anything. Outside, the air felt too clean, too ordinary. The world had already started pretending none of it had happened. Weeks passed after that, then months. I never heard from the commander again. No cleanup teams returned. No government vehicles appeared at my home. It was as if the entire road, the way station, the forest, and everything inside it had been sealed off from the rest of reality. June survived. That is what they told me eventually. She recovered slowly, quietly. They placed her under long-term care, no details given, no visitation allowed. I did not argue, because I understood something by then. Some doors, once opened, cannot be closed without consequences following them through. I returned to driving for a short time after that. Not long-haul routes, local deliveries. Anything that kept me moving without thinking. But every night when I stopped the truck and sat alone in the cab, I could still hear it. Tap, tap, not outside. Inside memory. The harmonica never came back to me, and I stopped asking for it. One night, months later, I parked near a wooded rest stop in Pennsylvania. Nothing unusual, just a quiet stretch of highway and dark trees beyond the parking lot. I was eating cold food from a gas station bag when I heard something faint outside. At first, I ignored it. Then I heard it again. 3 broken notes. Low. Careful. Familiar. My hands stopped moving immediately. I sat there completely still in the cab while the sound faded into the wind. I did not get out. I did not look. Because I already understood what it meant. Some things do not die in forests. Some things just change where they live. And the worst part is not what they become. It is what remembers you after everything else forgets. That is what Abel taught me. Not through words, not through violence, but through choice. Because in the end, he did not run when he could have. He did not abandon her when survival demanded it. He stayed. Even when it cost him everything. And I finally understood the truth I had been avoiding since the first night on that road. Monsters are not defined by what they are made of. They are defined by what they refuse to leave behind. The forest still calls sometimes. Not for me, but I think I know who answers it now. And I never sleep the same way twice after remembering that sound.